afternoon and welcome to this episode of Mashreq Sustainable Finance Dialogues, a podcast series where we're looking at all of the issues revolving around climate finance, how to finance sustainability projects, bringing them in the money as they call it, but also how to bring sustainable finance to the ground, to the retail level, in order for individuals rather than just corporations to make the right choices. And of course, we're kind of turning the cat on its head a little bit in this episode where we're looking at community building and how can the private sector empower society to make sustainable choices, when quite often the question is usually reversed. How can society make business make more sustainable choices? But on this occasion, we're turning it the other way around because, of course, the challenge for an individual and on an individual basis to bring sustainability into all our lives, in all our financial choices, is such an important part of the solution of the pathway to net zero. So it gives me great pleasure to kick off with our host, Mr. Hussam Abdel Al, Senior Director, Origination and Sustainable Finance for Investment Banking, Mashreq. Hussam, the floor is yours for some opening comments.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you. This is a timely conversation. As we know, climate change has been given rise to existential threats that we see in front of us. It's no longer a theory. Rising sea levels, extreme weather is upon us. And it is something that we need to work together in order to combat. Governments, corporations, individuals all need to work jointly. Every action, or in some cases inaction, have a heavy price. We at Mashreq had taken this as a challenge, and not only as a challenge, but also as an opportunity. We have a duty to the society, but also selfishly, we have interest in supporting our clients. So we are engaged in client discussion on their transformation. We have developed for the bank a sustainability framework. We are developing tools and enabling solutions, transactions to clients in order to aid them in that transition. One level down goes hand in hand with that drive and the desire for clients to do the right thing. We need to find ways to support society in order to put a feedback loop pressure on our clients and us to do the right thing. And for doing that, we're making available tools for clients, and we're making available tools and products for individuals to do more sustainable choices.
Let's welcome Anita Menderata, Special Advisor to the Secretary General, United Nations World Tourism Organization, Advisor Board Member of the Royal Commission of Al Ula. Anita, your thoughts, particularly as we sit on the doorstep of COP27 coming to Egypt, and of course COP28 not far behind it coming to the UAE, both in essence countries where they're very sort of public sector-led economies, the private sector bringing that role into taking a leadership position in sustainability. Your thoughts on the theme?
Thank you very much. And assalamu alaikum. And thank you very much to Mashreq for the invitation to be with you. I also bring with me the warmest greetings of the Secretary General of the UNWTO, Zura Kashvili, who recognizes the importance of this conversation right now. And it goes very much to what's already been said. This is about choices. We're at a critical time where not only the tourism sector, but the global economy has been broken because of COVID. And we have a chance to not just build back better, but build forward better. And this is where the private sector has a critical role to play. What's also wonderful, and I thank you for bringing the issue of tourism and transport into this conversation, because as we know that we cannot recover, we cannot build without scalability. Scalability requires investment, and that sustainable investment has now become an imperative of us working in an interdependent way to rebuild the global economy. We found that our Secretary General at a UN level, Antonio Guterres, had said during COVID that it is imperative that we rebuild the tourism sector in a safe, equitable, and climate-friendly manner to ensure tourism regains its position as a provider of decent jobs, stable incomes, and the protection of cultural and natural heritage. I call that out from the point of view of it was the first time ever the UN and the global community has seen travel, tourism, and transport as a part of social development and sustainable development. So to answer your question, the point about the private sector and why it's important, Mother Nature knew what she was doing when she stopped the world for 2 years. She has forced us to work together. The private sector and the public sector are two hands that clap together. Sustainable finance is the glue between those two hands to make them work. So what's really critical going forward is making those choices. We're looking at it very much from a supply perspective. When we look at it from a financing perspective, what we need to recognize as well is the demand perspective. Customers are demanding sustainable solutions. Investors are demanding sustainable opportunities. Banks are demanding sustainable case making. All of this works towards why the private sector is now critical, because it is the avenue to mobilize all of these choices through governments, through academia, through the NGOs. So again, thank you for the conversation, because as we lead up to COP20, it's critical that we move past the theory and into actionable solutions with every single role player stepping up and leading their part.
Well, let's welcome one of those role players, Karan Sharma, Director of Financial Planning and Analysis at the BIA Group. Karan, thank you so much for joining us. I'd also welcome your thoughts on how can the private sector empower society to make sustainable choices. You, of course, have been an equity research analyst with the Bank of America, Merrill Lynch throughout your career, quite often dealing with publicly traded listed companies and analyzing them for many things, including, I'm sure, their ESG posture. Your thoughts on this topic?
Sure, Sean. Thank you, Mashreq, and thank you, Anita, for the wonderful opening remarks. And certainly, just echoing what Anita said, I think on the corporate level, I would say in my organization, we used to say, why are you working for? We used to say, to create shareholder value. So what I would like to add here is, the future, the companies no longer operate by prioritizing shareholders as the dominant audience, I believe. And this means that decision making is now involving in these corporates around the ESG factors, environmental, social, and governance factors. Here at BIA, again, we are the sustainable champions, in the region. We are ensuring that, if any actions that we do are sustainable, be it comes to the office that we are working in, and I can talk about it a little bit more later. I heard that only 9% of the plastic is being recycled in general. That shows, the room for, circular economy that we want to push here. And also in terms of the ESG reporting, what we have seen these days, and especially Mashreq must be doing it, there are special category of ESG loans that have been given to the organizations at a lower cost of capital. So green financing has been pushed. So in general, the good thing is, the climate is showing its side. And finally, I would say, the world is waking up. And the start has to happen on the grassroots level, I still believe, right from the education organizations, where I saw Harvard and NC now developing sustainable courses, 6 months, 1 year. So on the grassroots level, we are starting. But I still believe on the corporate level, we need to have very solid ESG reporting standards, because we see investors need to come in, and what would pull them is the standardization. If investors believe there is no standardization, so standardization needs to be brought on the standard aspect, and I'm sure gradually the investor is going to come. So we need to start at the grassroots level, moving to corporates, and then eventually I'm sure investors gonna chip in.
I just wanted to come back to you, Anita, on that point. Investors come in. we've seen in recent months, really, literally since COP26 and since the sort of second half of this year, even, it's accelerated a big push back against investment in ESG. You can't open the Financial Times nearly any day of the week at the moment, and there is a pushback, as sort of a counterforce against ESG investing. What's your own take on that, and how should private, individuals who are looking at this, and of course we're trying to address their choices at the moment, how to interpret this current sort of headline push back against ESG?
I thank you for your question, and I love your question. I work in diplomacy, and it's about words. What I struggle with ESG is that people are talking about it because whether it's sustainability, ESG, whatever we want to call it, it's become very fashionable. People can't talk about it. You can't say we don't have a sustainability strategy. You can't say to someone we're not taking DEI seriously. All of these have become labels, and they've lost the heartbeat behind them. So I believe there's a great deal of pushback because people are utilizing the terminology without showing, exactly as has just been said now by Karan, the standards. They're not showing the ROI. They're not showing the ethic behind it. And what's really important to me is the fact that when we put these labels on, whether it's sustainability, DEI, ESG, are people taking it personally? And this goes to then your point about private sector as well as consumers and customers. Ultimately, unless we make the definition of sustainability personal, people are going to make personal choices that reflect that ethic. Unless we make ESG personal, with personally asking, do people understand what the E, the S, and the G stand for? Probably not. It's like the SDGs. There's 17 of them. They're not a bingo card. They're a choice for creating a better world, because quite honestly, we're business people. The alternative to a sustainable business is bankruptcy. Sustainability is not a choice. It's a fundamental part of the DNA, but we need to move past the language and get to the delivery and the proof of understanding it at a personal level, and therefore making the investment choices to support that.
Hussam, you at Mashreq, of course, Mashreq has always been somewhat of a pioneering bank, very much a consumer focused bank, and obviously have grown into corporate and every other sector. But ultimately, you've always really had your nose to the ground and very close to the sort of a sort of enterprise pioneering engagement with the retail level. How do you see this intersection point on attracting the individual, and given the current sort of issues around ESG, which is somewhat ironic given the scale in which the sustainable narrative has reached the public consciousness?
Thank you very much. And just to add a little bit to what Anita had said, which first of all, I agree with it all. There's a level of some politics and some from the public lack of some information and understanding of what we're trying to do. Sustainability,
which gives you a big responsibility and opportunity, doesn't it, as a bank, to participate in the education?
And that's exactly what we're doing. We have the topic is now hot because of the COPs coming to the region. This is absolutely changing the level of or the amount of conversations we're having with clients. There is a great level of education that we need to do on that level, and that those dialogues are happening. ESG is not CSR. This is not something you're doing for PR. You are doing in order to stay relevant and in order to manage actual relevant risks that could harm your business. This is not something nice to have or good to do. There is also some pushback from the investment community because there is a confusion that if a fund manager is focusing on ESG, he then will have to reduce his focus on return. And that is also a level of understanding of the data. The data is telling us that companies that are doing better on ESG are performing better, stock doing better. It could be a correlation to the fact that the best companies are doing a lot on ESG. I acknowledge that. However, it is a fact that companies that are doing better are outperforming on ESG, are outperforming their peers who are not. There's a good level also of politics, like I said, in the pushback. Louisiana's decision is pure politics.
Karan, I'd welcome your thoughts picking up on that and what kind of an opportunity that presents here. Of course, the subject of our podcast today is the question, how can the private sector empower society to make sustainable choices, which we thought when we were framing the question today, very pertinent to this region, because we are very much in a top-down economy here. A lot of things are government-led, so the initiative doesn't come from the ground as it might in other economies and other societies. And so, in some sense, a greater responsibility and role for the private sector to play a leadership position here.
And I agree, and absolutely, as he said, echoing Husam's thought that, this is not a CSR activity anymore, but just linking that how this the ESG needs to come in the culture of the organizations rather than, but initially I believe, government has a great role to play. I'm just giving an example. In my country, I would wear a helmet on the bike just because a cop is watching me and he might give me a bill. So, but I don't know, it's for my own safety. That's what the culture. When I'm in UAE, I'm wearing a seatbelt, I'm putting a helmet because it's in the culture of the country that I need to wear it for my own safety rather than. So here, I think, and that's what we have seen. Privates are not coming to this section because right now they need government support. For example, ETS, Anita talked about, it was in the news for long before they applied. CCFDs are being used in the hydrogen. They have been talked about since long, yet to be implemented. So I think a lot of subsidy, a lot of allowances, a lot of credits coming from the government sector would be very, very helpful. I think privates are ready and they have started to realize, especially what they have seen in the last 2 years. But support from the governments, a clear policy making, a clear vision document, and what is in it for me from the commercial aspect for the private companies will be critical to drive this culture forward.
Anita, of course, tourism, you are with the UN World Tourism Organization and an advisor board member of the Royal Commission of Al Ula, which is a really exciting new area of the Saudi Arabia, attracting tourists for the first time in probably 2000 or plus years, a really unique moment. But ultimately, the question of the sustainability to create a framework of investment that is respects and celebrates the economic opportunity. Tourism has quite often been framed in the heavy high carbon space, given the lot of travel long distances in airplanes, etc., and the impact of tourists on a local ecosystem and so forth. How is that changing? How does that need to change? And where can that private sector role, sort of, if you like, again, in this region, which is a big tourism region, play a leadership in that?
Thank you for the question and for the local context as well. I'd like to go back to something that Hussam said to answer your question.
Please.
And about ESG, and to your point that it's a solid basis for a business model. It's the same as the SDGs. It's not there, as you said, CSR, it's not there for PR reasons. It's good business principles put into a model, and it's not a choice of the E, the S, or the G. It's when they work symbiotically that they work well at cultural levels, social levels, environmental levels, and economic levels. To your point, Sean, I'm going to focus specifically on the aviation sector. I've been working with the sector for many years, and it's very unusual that you have someone from traditionally travel and tourism cross into aviation, because you need to know what you're talking about in aviation. It is highly, highly technically and financially specialized. The point being, we all know pre-COVID, there was the whole flight shaming generation. The Extinction Revolution particularly was saying, anchor the planes, anchor the planes. We saw with COVID, 16,000 commercial aircraft were grounded. All borders and skies were shut. 6 million people were stranded when borders shut. They had to get home somehow. Aviation took over. Aviation carried the doctors, carried the PPE, carried the vaccination. The issue is not aviation, it's emissions. If we stop global aviation, if we stop global travel and trade, we're going to have a significant impact on the global GDP, on investment, on employment. It's about dealing with emissions. The aviation sector is serious about this, to the point where last week in Montreal at the ICAO Assembly, for the first time ever, all governments signed on to the agreement of net zero by 2050 for international travel, which is a huge commitment, because the cost, the financing required to actually make sustainable aviation fuels possible, to scale it up, is massive. So the point being, we know that travel and tourism is absolutely critical for the growth of economies and societies. What we're doing is taking away from the sustainability of that. That's emissions, not aviation. So to going back to your original question about how do we empower consumers, we need to listen to them. What is their barriers stopping them from living sustainable practices and lifestyles? We need to inform them what are the issues. It's not aviation, it's emissions. That's the problem. And then we need to find ways of investing and scaling up solutions. But the consumer, as the decision maker, needs to have the right information to make a qualified choice about living a sustainable lifestyle.
And Hussam, that really is, in a sense, education in order to be informed, to make those right choices. We're looking at the need for deeper collaboration between educational industries and educational sector and industry. Ultimately, that gap between academia and industry and the education of the next generation, embedding this sustainability sort of agenda within education is a great opportunity and necessity. Your thoughts on the outlook for that in this region?
It'll have to start from the education that is done in the corporate level. So if we're talking about moving corporations, capacity development, adoption are programs that cannot be lectured over a few slides. You need this to be a top-down buy-in from the board, buy-in from management, having the right program, explaining to the stakeholders, in this case, let's say the employees, why this is important, number one, for business, for their annual KPIs, and for their clients, in order for them to become more relevant to their clients and more successful in becoming more of a trusted advisor to those clients.
In some ways, you have, just to interrupt you, sorry, just to pick up on one of the points you made there. The customer, if you like, quite often when a bank or an increasingly other sectors are rating, when you take an Uber driver, you're rating your Uber driver. Was he a good or bad, a medium? Banks are quite often rating the credit worthiness of their customers. And similarly, banks and other institutions are being rated themselves, and their ESG profile is now a critical part of that rating of a bank or another corporate. Where does that kind of a tool, do you think, have a role to play in informing and educating individuals and customers to also be more competent and credible?
Take it down to the consumer level, it is about giving them more information and more choices. And that's exactly what we're trying to focus on at Mashreq. Number one, the consumer should know what is their choices could have, what type of impact it could have on the environment or others, and what other choices do they have, and enable for them tools in order to access better choices.
We did a program recently in Oman on where we were looking at the the employability of the companies, where we were giving them an employability rating, Karan, where we were looking at not what are your national statistics you have 50% nationals, you have 80%, whatever your quota is, but more, what is your activity in order to maintain the employability of your staff? So if indeed they choose to move on to another opportunity, that they would have a value in the market. So it's all about employability. I'm just bringing that up as a reference to getting your views on where one could bring these types of tools into the area of upskilling employees in order to ensure that the reskilling and upskilling accommodates these new challenges and awareness around sustainability.
Absolutely right. And Sean, just to see the level of this, and we're talking about why it's important to introduce ESG grassroots. If I go to my organization right now and being honest, and if I ask what's the full form of the acronym ESG, how many things you can name the full form of ESG. So the reality is, I think, less than 30-40%. So the thing is, you're absolutely right. When the employees are, they're upskilled in terms of ESG, they will make smart decisions internally and externally. They will push companies, they will abandon companies, who are not following the norms. And then eventually, see, everything is linked. It all starts from the consumers, right? Consumers making the right decision, going to those corporates which are good ESG practices. They have solid carbon ratings, etc. And when they're aware of these things, they will look for these filters, not just by even making a physical purchase or by even investing in those corporations. So you have given a message to the corporations, and then investors are looking, okay, and this is going to drive the sales, etc. And investors eventually are going to, pump in more money to those organizations because the sales are going higher. They're following the ESG. So it's a chain. And if I put a chain, it's the consumers to the corporates to the investors. And it all starts from the employee, the consumer, the retail level, as you rightly mentioned. So just going back to the same point at the grassroots level, extremely relevant that we introduce mandatory, courses in the universities. We introduce mandatory, as part of the KPI, Hassan was mentioning in the organizations that you have to, and there should be a badge. You should be rated on an ESG badge on your organization. So we need to bring in this culture, which is going to help them, as you said, upskilling, not just for the organization, but in general for the economy as a whole.
I just want to come to closing comments now, Anita, and get your thoughts on that and bringing that down to the ground level, because again, in the big tourism sector of the region, we have a lot of SMEs in that space, have a huge impact on the ecosystem in which they work, but don't necessarily have the resources in which to adapt a cohesive ESG strategy. Your thoughts on how they can be supported, what role they have to play in the outcome that we're seeking?
And thank you for the final question. I think what's important from my side is this. It's the opportunity cost. We need to flip the model, whether it's consumers, employees, corporations, small business owners, government officials. What if we don't do this? If we look at it in terms, it's the opportunity cost, because and again, it should not be a choice. If we don't make these investments in sustainability, what is the impact going to be? What's also critical coming out of this last 2 years is, at a consumer level and employee level, reputational damage. If we don't take action, what is the reputational damage to our organization, to our country, to our family name, whatever it might be? And that's where I think when you actually position it that way, people understand. I'm going to go back to for a second about what Karan said about the helmet. It was brilliant. As much as you were avoiding the penalty of being charged for not wearing a helmet, the what if I don't? A small cost is the ticket. The larger cost is a loss of life. That's more motivating than do I have it? And now we hear everyone saying in the States with what's happened with hurricane season, it's only going to get worse. So if we don't make these changes, we know the dread we're going to face. That is a choice. Inaction is always a choice, and it's a very dangerous choice.
Well, let's give the last word to our host today, Hussam Abdelal of Investment Banking Mashreq, who I think I'm going to give a soundbite of the podcast to, and maybe I'm going to make that a regular feature. ESG is not CSR. Hussam, the last word with you, please.
Sean, thank you. Anita and Karen, amazing. Thank you very much for this conversation. The time couldn't be more urgent for us to have this dialogue. What I gathered from everybody here is how important it is for everybody to step up and do their part. There's a great level of work on governments to give the right incentives, because not force it on companies, but give them incentives, and for companies then to move forward on their transition plans, give more information to consumers, and in turn, it goes hand in hand. More informed consumers will make those corporations do more on those transition plans. Financing will follow, because if you are not managing that transition right, I'm concerned about financing you as a bank, and so will the investors. Thank you very, very much.
Well, I think that is the perfect sort of place to put it, because at the end, what's at stake here is not only the collective at stake, the climate, the environment, but individually, the longer each of us individually or collectively stay outside the ESG and sustainable finance requirements, we will suffer the consequence. Our credit ratings will be lower, our access to capital will be lower, and of course, without that, no business, no individual can reach their dreams. So very real issues at stake here. Thank you very much for being on this episode of Mashreq Sustainable Finance Dialogues.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, team.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank
All
you,
the
everyone.
best.